In the United States, which is sometimes seen as a land of opportunity and prosperity, poverty is nevertheless a major problem. Millions of Americans struggle to pay for necessities like food, housing, and healthcare despite their country's affluence. We shall learn the truth about the startling realities of poverty in America in this video, which exposes systemic issues and pervasive injustices that need immediate response. Number 10. High poverty rate. The sheer number of Americans impacted by poverty is among the most shocking statistics about it. According to the most recent statistics, roughly 11.4% of Americans, or 37.2 million people, live in poverty. This figure highlights how widespread poverty is and how it affects a sizable section of the populace. Children, members of racial and ethnic minorities, and residents in rural areas are among the groups with the highest rates of poverty. Number 9. Child poverty. When it comes to poverty, children are among the most vulnerable demographics. Roughly 1 in 6 children in the United States, or 11.6 million children, live in poverty. A significant proportion of impoverished children has far-reaching consequences for their future economic prospects, education, and well-being. A cycle of poverty that spans generations is exacerbated by the increased likelihood of hunger, ill health, and lower educational performance among children raised in impoverished families. Number 8. Racial and ethnic disparities. In the U.S., racial and ethnic minorities are disproportionately affected by poverty. Black Americans have a poverty rate of approximately 19.5%, whereas Hispanic Americans have a rate of approximately 17%. On the other hand, 8.2% of non-Hispanic white people live in poverty. These differences draw attention to the structural injustices that still exist in American culture and are caused by things like prejudice, unequal access to high-quality education, and differences in work prospects. Number 7. Working poor. It's a myth that people in poverty are mainly jobless. Nonetheless, a large percentage of impoverished Americans are working poor, meaning they have full or part-time jobs but are still unable to make ends meet. In 2020, 7.4 million full-time year-round workers were still considered to be poor. This issue is a reflection of the growing cost of living, which is outpacing pay growth and the inadequacy of earnings in many areas. Number 6. Food insecurity. One major problem linked to poverty is food insecurity. About 38.3 million Americans were living in food-insecure homes in 2020, which meant they didn't always have access to enough food for a healthy, active life. Children are disproportionately affected by food insecurity. About 6 million children live in households where there is food insecurity. This problem is made worse by low-income areas, sometimes known as food deserts, having restricted access to reasonably priced, wholesome food. Number 5. Housing instability. Another important factor contributing to poverty in America is unstable housing. The high rates of homelessness and housing instability are caused by the fact that millions of Americans find it difficult to afford secure and stable homes. In the U.S., there were more than 580,000 homeless persons on any given night in January 2020. Furthermore, a large number of people live in unstable housing and pay rent that exceeds 30% of their income, which is deemed oppressive by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. One of the biggest obstacles to economic mobility and stability is the scarcity of cheap housing. Number 4. Healthcare access. One of the biggest issues facing low-income Americans is access to healthcare. Even with the Affordable Care Act in place, millions of Americans do not have health insurance or have inadequate coverage. About 28 million people lacked insurance in 2020, and a large number of others had trouble getting healthcare due to high deductibles and out-of-pocket expenses. Because people in low-income households are less likely to receive preventative treatment, which raises the prevalence of chronic diseases and shortens life expectancy, there is a strong correlation between poverty and poor health outcomes. Number 3. Educational inequality. Poverty has two causes: educational inequality and poverty. Low-income students frequently attend underfunded schools with few resources, which has a negative impact on their academic performance. Students from low-income families have lower rates of high school graduation, and those who do graduate are less likely to enroll in college. Lack of access to high-quality education restricts economic prospects, exacerbates income disparity, and keeps people in a cycle of poverty. Number 2. Geographic disparities. The distribution of poverty in the U.S. is not uniform. Rather, it differs greatly by location. In comparison to metropolitan regions, poverty rates are typically higher in rural areas, especially in the South and Appalachia. The rates of poverty in states like Louisiana, New Mexico, and Mississippi are among the highest in the nation. Historical, economic, and social difficulties, as well as restricted access to healthcare, education, and employment opportunities in rural areas, all have an impact on these spatial discrepancies. Number 1. Impact of COVID-19. Poverty and inequality that already existed in the U.S. have been made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic. During the pandemic, millions of Americans lost their jobs or had their work hours slashed, which drove many of them into poverty. For women, persons of color, and low-wage workers in particular, the epidemic has had a particularly negative economic impact. Even though government actions like stimulus money and increased unemployment benefits provide short-term respite, the pandemic's long-term economic effects are still being felt, and many households are finding it difficult to recover. Overcoming poverty, policy suggestions. Because poverty has many facets, finding comprehensive policy solutions that address its core causes and offer support to a range of sectors is necessary to combat it. The following policy suggestions could contribute to a decrease in poverty in the U.S. Raising the federal minimum wage. Getting working families out of poverty requires raising the federal minimum wage. An increased minimum wage would make it more likely that full-time employees could pay for needs on their own and not need government aid. Raising the minimum wage has already been enacted by numerous states and localities, indicating its beneficial effects on workers' earnings and general financial security. Increasing the affordability of housing access. In order to address the affordable housing dilemma, more affordable housing must be built and low-income households must receive rental assistance. Housing insecurity can be lessened by enacting laws limiting rent, building more affordable housing, and extending the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Expanding healthcare access. Improving the standard of living and lowering poverty rates in America require guaranteeing that all citizens have access to reasonably priced healthcare. Important first steps toward attaining universal healthcare coverage include raising premium subsidies for health insurance, tackling the exorbitant costs of prescription medications, and expanding Medicaid in states that have not yet done so. Education investment. Breaking the cycle of poverty requires investing in education at all levels. This entails boosting public school financing, extending early childhood education access, and lowering the cost of higher education by implementing policies like tuition-free community colleges and enhanced Pell Grants. Programs that encourage workforce training and adult education can also assist low-income people in acquiring the skills necessary for higher-paying positions. Making social safety nets stronger. For low-income families, strengthening social safety nets like child tax credits, food assistance programs, and unemployment benefits can be quite helpful. During difficult economic times, families can be kept out of poverty by making these programs easily accessible and expanding. Encouraging low-income areas to develop economically. Rural and low-income communities can be revitalized with the support of targeted economic development efforts. This entails making infrastructural investments, assisting small companies, and offering incentives to companies operating in areas that are economically underprivileged. Increasing rural communities' access to high-speed internet can also aid in closing the digital divide and open up new business prospects. The function of advocacy and community. To combat poverty, community advocacy initiatives are just as important as policy solutions. Community groups, nonprofits, and grassroots organizations offer vital assistance and services to individuals in need, ranging from job training programs and educational materials to food banks and homeless shelters. These groups provide individualized support and promote a feeling of community and solidarity, frequently filling in the gaps left by government initiatives. Advocacy groups also put up a lot of effort to mobilize resources, change public policy, and increase awareness of issues related to poverty. Individuals and communities can contribute to structural change by advocating locally and nationally, making sure that the needs and voices of those most impacted by poverty are heard. A comprehensive plan to end poverty, create a society that is more inclusive, and just must include both community support and collective action. In conclusion, millions of people nationwide are impacted by the complicated and multidimensional problem of poverty in America. The startling statistics mentioned above emphasize how urgently comprehensive legislative measures are needed to address the underlying causes of poverty and help individuals in need. We can work toward a more just and prosperous society where everyone has the chance to thrive by increasing the minimum wage, increasing access to affordable housing and healthcare, making investments in education, fortifying social safety nets, and encouraging economic development in low-income areas. Please like, comment, and share our video with your friends and family if you enjoyed it. Remember to click the bell icon to receive the most recent updates.